After decades out in remote country, I learned there are two kinds of quiet. There is the quiet that means the wind is down and the day is settling in. Then there is the quiet that feels like it is listening back. I used to think experience made you safe from that feeling, because you learn the land, you learn the animals, you learn what belongs and what does not. That was my first mistake. I assumed time in the field made me immune to being surprised. I assumed I had already seen the worst of what isolation can do to a person. The thing that changed my mind did not appear suddenly. It did not jump out of a shadow and charge me. It arrived slowly, over time, like a problem you ignore because it is small. And then one day you look up, and it has grown into something you cannot pretend away. I can tell you the most unsettling part was not the moment I finally saw it clearly. The worst part was realizing it learned me. It learned my roots, my habits, my timing. And once it had that, distance stopped being something I controlled. I spent most of my adult life working remote land. Not in the tourist sections, not where people take pictures and go home by lunch. I mean the back end of the map. Service roads that fade into two ruts. Old fire breaks that only show up as a line of lighter trees. Long patrols where the only sign of people is a beer can from a year ago, or the cut end of a fence somebody tried to move. Most of that time I was alone. I was used to it. I liked it. The work is simple when you do it right. You check conditions. You check access points. You look for damage, for illegal dumping, for poaching, for stray fires, for anything that can turn into trouble. You learn patterns fast. Deer move one way when the weather shifts. Coyotes drift along the edges of open ground at certain hours. Bears leave certain kinds of sign, and they do it in certain places. Even people have patterns. You can tell the difference between a hiker, a hunter, and someone who is trespassing because the ground tells you. The trash tells you. The way they walk tells you. I never pretended I was fearless, but I did not scare easy either. I did not jump at every noise. I did not tell stories to entertain myself. I trusted what I could verify. That is why it bothered me when the first anomalies started showing up on routes I had walked for years. It began with small disturbances. A patch of ground scuffed up near a game trail, like something heavy had turned around there. A few prints in soft soil that did not match the usual track shapes. I did not get excited about it. In remote country, you see weird things all the time. A bear can step wrong and leave a print that looks like something else. A coyote can overlap its tracks in mud and make it look bigger than it is. Sometimes people wear strange boots. Sometimes someone drags something and you get a mark that looks like a tail or a branch. Most of it has a normal explanation if you keep your head. But then the signs repeated. Not in the same place, but along the same corridor. Always on or near the routes I liked because they were efficient. I had certain loops I used because they covered a lot of ground with the least wasted effort. A ridge line that let you see several valleys at once. A long cut that paralleled a creek. A stretch of mixed timber where people like to slip in and hunt out of season. Those were my regular paths. The odd tracks appeared intermittently, then vanished. I would find them 1 week, then nothing for 2. Then they would show up again like a reminder. What caught my attention was the size and the way they pressed into the ground. Not just long, heavy, deep in a way that suggested weight. The toes, when the soil was right, looked wrong for any common animal. 5, like a hand, but not a hand. Wider than a human foot and longer than any boot I had seen out there. There were times the impression looked more like a paw than a foot, but the shape kept pulling toward the same idea. Something upright, something that placed weight in a way that was not four-legged. I tried to be honest with myself. I told myself it was probably a bear that had walked oddly. I told myself it was a big wolf, and the mud blurred it. I told myself it was nothing. I did not write anything down. I did not mention it to anyone. That is how you avoid turning normal work into nonsense. You observe. You keep it in your head. You see if it repeats. If it does, then you take it seriously. The next thing was the marks on trees. If you spend enough time out there, you know what normal marking looks like. Bears leave claw marks low to mid-height. Deer rub saplings and leave shredded bark at a certain level. People carve initials and arrows. The marks I started finding were higher than expected. Not just a little higher. High enough that I had to stand next to the trunk and raise my arm to estimate it. They were always just outside a clear line of sight. Not deep in the brush where you might miss them by chance, and not right in the open where a random hiker would take a picture. They were placed where you had to be moving the way I moved to notice them. That bothered me. It felt intentional, but I still did not want to give it that much credit. Then I noticed how the disturbances lined up with my schedule. I was not clockwork, but I had routines. I would hit certain access points early, because if someone was going to trespass, they did it at first light. I would check certain creek crossings after rain, because that is where you see erosion or illegal cuts. I would do longer loops on certain days and shorter ones on others, depending on workload. Over time, I saw that the odd sign showed up on the days after I ran a route. Not during, not before. It was like something moved in behind me after I passed, left a trace, then slipped away again. At first, I thought it was a person. A poacher, maybe. Someone watching my truck. Someone timing me. That was a normal concern. Human trouble is usually the worst trouble. You can deal with animals. People do unpredictable things. So I started treating it like a human problem. I began varying my route. I would start at one trailhead and then double back to another. I would park in one spot and walk in a direction that did not match the vehicle position. I would stop on a ridge and watch for movement in the tree line with binoculars. I expected sooner or later to see a person. What I did not expect was how the sign adjusted faster than I did. One week I took a route I rarely used, one that cut across a slope, enjoying my usual loop from a different angle. I figured if someone was watching the usual pattern, I would break it. I walked the slope, crossed the drainage, came up into the familiar area. Nothing looked strange. No tracks, no fresh breaks. I felt almost relieved. Then I got back to my truck and saw the ground behind it. Not boot prints, not tire marks. Prints that pressed into the dirt and gravel in a line that came up to within a few feet of my rear bumper. They were partly distorted by the mixed surface, but the depth was there, heavy, deep, and the stride between them was long enough that it did not make sense for a man. That was the moment the problem shifted from I found something unusual to something is tracking me. It is hard to explain what that does to your head if you have not lived alone in places where help is far away. When you are in a city, being watched is an idea. You can brush it off. When you are alone on a remote road and you see fresh sign behind your vehicle, it becomes physical. It is right there. It means something stood close to your truck while you were gone. It means you were not alone. It means whatever left that sign did not mind being close to your only way out. I checked the area around the truck. I walked the perimeter of the pull-off. I looked into the trees. I listened. I smelled that normal forest smell, pine and damp soil and old leaves. Then I caught something else, a musky odor, not the sharp smell of skunk and not the sweet rot of a dead animal. It was thick and animal, like wet fur left in a closed room. It was faint, and it came and went in the air like it was clinging to certain spots. I told myself it was a bear. Bears can stink when they are wet and close. That explanation kept my mind from running away. But I started noticing the odor again later, in other places, and always in the same pattern, near the spots I stopped often, near the access roads, near my truck. A month in, the signs were no longer random. I would find disturbances near the same ridgeline, the same creek crossing, the same bend in a service road where I liked to pause and scan the valley. If I stopped at a spot to eat or drink water, I would find disturbed ground near that spot days later. If I spent more time in an area checking for human intrusion, I would find more sign later. It was like something was collecting information on me by watching where I lingered. The first visual confirmation happened when I did not want it to. I was finishing a loop late in the day. The light was soft, the kind that makes everything look flat. That is the worst light for spotting movement. I was walking a cut line where the understory was thin, and to my left there was a thick wall of trees. I kept seeing, just at the edge of vision, a vertical shape that did not match the trunks. I stopped. The forest stopped too. No birds, no wind, nothing I could use as background noise. I waited, and then I saw it. A tall shape, motionless, at the edge of tree cover. Not crouched, not on 4 legs, standing. The height registered as wrong before my brain could label it. It was taller than a man, and it was too broad to be a deer. It was dark, like wet hair, and it had the outline of a head set forward and shoulders that rolled down into long arms. It did not move with urgency when it noticed me. That is one detail that stuck. A bear will either bolt or bluff. A person will shift, hide, or step out. This thing stepped back, slow and controlled, like it did not need to rush. It slid behind 2 trunks, and the shape broke apart into shadow and bark. Then it was gone, and the forest went back to normal sound, like nothing happened. I did not chase it. People who chase things in the woods get hurt. I marked the location in my head, noted the wind, noted the time. Then I walked out, keeping my pace steady, refusing to let panic speed me up and make noise. I reached my truck, drove out, and tried to tell myself it was just a bad light trick. But the next days did not let me do that. The shift from me tracking sign to me being tracked became obvious in small ways. I would find prints behind my vehicle again, even when I parked in different places. I would find disturbed ground near access roads. I would find brush moved in ways that looked like someone had stepped there and then stepped away. And the same odor started showing up at multiple sites, always faint, always enough to make me pause. Night patrols became uncomfortable rather than threatening. I was used to moving at dusk or early night in certain seasons. You do it when you need to check for illegal fires, night hunting, or trespassers. Normally, at night, the forest is loud. Small animals move. Insects buzz. Wind hits the canopy, and it all becomes a low wash of sound. During this period, I started getting stretches where that sound would drop away. Not fully silent, but reduced, like something had pushed it down. I would hear a sound parallel to my movement, not approaching, not retreating. A step in leaf litter that matched my pace. A soft snap that always happened to the side. If I stopped, it stopped. If I moved, it moved. It never crossed open ground while I watched. It always stayed in cover. That is the part that made it feel like more than random wildlife. It was not reacting. It was choosing. This went on for weeks, then months. At some point, you stop counting days because it becomes part of your routine. You get up, you work, you come home, and you carry a quiet weight with you. I started adjusting routes more intentionally to test what was happening. I would take a path, then reverse it. I would cut across through thick brush where people do not like to go. I would spend time in places that had no practical reason for me to be there, just to see if sign appeared later. And each time, the thing adjusted. If I went left, the sign shifted left. If I went right, it shifted right. If I stayed out of an area for a week, the disturbances showed up near the roads, as if it was getting closer to the human edge. I stopped writing anything official about it. Not because I was ashamed. Because the moment you put something on paper, it becomes a story, and people make stories bigger. I did not want speculation. I wanted to know what was real. So I kept it to myself, I trusted my own eyes more than the rumor mill. Then I found evidence of something that looked like intelligence in a way that was hard to ignore. I came through a trail I had used since my early years. It was narrow, and it ran through mixed timber with a lot of deadfall. Normally, you step over logs, or you go around. This time I found a section where several fallen branches had been placed in a way that subtly redirected the path, not blocked fully, not piled like a storm, just arranged so that the easiest way through led you toward a small clearing and away from a tighter section near the creek. I looked at it for a long time. In the woods, branches fall. That is normal. But the way these were placed felt guided. They were too clean. The ends were not tangled. The brush was tucked. It felt like someone did it with hands, not wind. It was not damage. It was guidance. And that is when a simple thought landed in my head and stayed there. It wants me where it wants me. The first close encounter happened in low light, and it was not a charge. I was coming down toward a service road just after sunset. The last color was out of the sky. The trees were black shapes. I had my light, but I was using it sparingly because too much light ruins your night vision and also tells everyone where you are. The air was cold and still. That odor came in on a faint breeze, stronger than I had smelled it before. I slowed down. I listened. I heard nothing but my own breath. Then, ahead of me, just off the path, a shape rose from behind a low stand of brush. Not rising like a bear standing up. Rising like something already upright, stepping forward into a gap. It was close enough that I could see the outline clearly, even without strong. Light, tall, broad. The head sat too far forward. The arms hung too low. The shoulders were heavy, and the stance was balanced in a way that made it look sure of itself. It watched me for several seconds. I did not see teeth. I did not see a snarl. I did not see aggression. What I saw was stillness and attention. It was watching like it was reading me. I could not make out details of the face, but I could see the eyes reflect faintly when my light shifted. The eyes were set forward, not on the sides like a deer. I stood there holding my breath. In that moment you do not think in full sentences. You think in simple facts. I am alone. It is close. It is bigger than me. I cannot outrun it. I cannot fight it if it wants to fight. The only thing I could control was my behavior, so I did not act like prey. I did not run. I did not yell. I held my ground and kept my light low. I let it see. I knew it was there. It stepped back deliberately. Not a jump. Not a scramble. A step, like a person choosing to end an interaction. Then it slid into cover and disappeared. After that, the psychological weight settled in. I started sleeping poorly, even on nights off. I would wake up and listen, not sure what I was listening for. I would scan the tree line when I pulled into my driveway. I would look at the ground around my truck like it might tell me something. I did not panic, but the unease was constant. That is the difference. Panic burns out. Unease lasts. I found signs near my vehicle more frequently. Sometimes it was just that odor again, faint near the rear of the truck. Sometimes it was disturbed gravel where something had stepped. Sometimes it was a mark in soft ground near a pull-off where I stopped often. It no longer avoided being noticed. It was letting me know it was close. Then it crossed a boundary I did not expect. One morning I woke up and went outside to check on a small shed near the back of my place. It is not a farm, not a big property, but enough land that the trees come close. I like it that way. I always felt safer with distance from neighbors and the noise of town. That morning, the air was cold and damp. I walked along the edge of the yard, and I caught that musky odor near the corner of the shed. I stopped. I looked at the ground. There were prints in the soft earth near the property line, right where the grass thinned into leaf litter. Deep impressions, partly blurred by dew, but enough to show size and shape. They were not deer. They were not bear. They were too long, too spread, and the stride length between them suggested something that moved easily in long steps. That was the moment I realized it followed me beyond its territory. Until then, I had told myself it was a problem contained to my work area, something that lived deep in the forest, something that did not cross into human space. Seeing sign near my own boundary line changed that. It meant the thing had watched me leave work, watched me drive home, and decided home was not off limits. It meant it was learning my routines outside of patrols. The following began the way the tracking began, small and almost deniable. At night, I started hearing faint sounds near the tree line. Not loud bangs, not screaming, just presence. A soft step, a branch shifting, a pause, then nothing. The sound never came close enough for me to see anything in the dark. But it happened on nights when the wind was low and the yard was still. It was the same pattern as the forest. Parallel movement, never direct approach, always just enough to make you aware. I checked the ground in the mornings. Sometimes I found nothing. Then sometimes I found disturbed leaves at the edge, a crushed patch of grass near the fence line, a smudged print in mud after rain, and that odor would show up near structures, not just out in the trees. It was like a line had been crossed, and it wanted me to recognize it. The loss of safe distance is hard to describe. When you work in remote places, you learn how to create space. You keep your back to solid objects. You keep line of sight. You keep a plan for how to leave. At home, you expect a different kind of safety. You expect walls, lights, neighbors in the distance, the normal human world. I started realizing the thing understood transitional zones. It did not step into my yard in full view. It stayed where tree line meets open ground, where fence edges meet brush, where the road bends, and your headlights cut the woods for a second. It showed itself at places where it could be seen and still remain in control. That felt deliberate. It was learning my routines outside work. I noticed it in the way it showed up after I came home late. If I got back after dark, the yard would feel wrong. Not haunted, just watched. If I went out early, before full sunrise, I would catch movement in the edge of trees that was too tall for deer. The dog in the neighborhood, a farm dog down the road, started barking in a different tone some nights. Not playful, not warning at strangers on the road. A low, steady bark that goes on too long, like it is reacting to something it cannot understand. I tried to ground myself. I checked locks. I installed a better light over the back door. I kept my truck parked where the beams could hit the edge of the tree line when I hit the remote. I did not arm myself like I was going to war. I did not turn into a person who jumps at every shadow. I stayed practical, but I could not ignore what my eyes and nose and instincts were telling me. One night, the boundary was crossed in a way that ended all doubt. It was late, and the sky was clear. The moon gave enough light that the yard had shape, but not enough to show detail. I had stepped onto the porch for a minute, not because I was brave, but because I was tired of feeling trapped in my own place. I stood there listening. The air smelled normal at first. Then the musky odor drifted in, like someone opened a door somewhere. I looked toward the tree line. There, near the edge of my property, stood the Dogman, fully upright, partially lit by moonlight and the faint spill of my porch light. It was unmoving. It did not crouch. It did not hide. It stood like it belonged there. The shape was wrong in a way that hits you in the chest. Long arms, a heavy upper body, a head that sat forward with a long muzzle profile. The legs were built for upright movement, not like a bear shifting its weight. The silhouette was canine and human mixed in a way that should not exist. It did not flee when I saw it. That is the detail that stays with me. Most animals bolt. Even big predators usually avoid being seen near a home because humans are loud and unpredictable. This thing held position until it was acknowledged. It was like it wanted that moment. It wanted me to see it clearly enough that I could not lie to myself anymore. I stood there frozen. My mind ran through every option. Run inside, shine a light, yell. None of it felt right. All of it felt like a prey reaction, so I stayed still. I let it know I saw it. I did not invite it. I did not challenge it. I simply existed in that moment with it, and I hated how that felt. After several seconds, the dogman stepped back, slow. It did not turn its back on me. It retreated into the tree line with the same deliberate control it had shown in the forest. Then it was gone. The yard went quiet again, and my own breathing sounded too loud. That was the night the meaning set in. It was not territorial defense anymore. If it was, it would have stayed in deep cover and kept me out. It was asserting presence. It was telling me that distance is a choice. It was telling me it could come close if it wanted to, and it was letting me know it knew where I lived. The next weeks were worse because the unknown was gone. The doubt was gone. Now I had a shape, a pattern, a truth my mind could not escape. I changed routines. I did not park in the same place every night. I varied the times I left and returned. I stopped taking late walks around the property. I kept my porch light on more often. I avoided certain areas of my work zone that felt like they were part of its path. I did not tell neighbors because there was nothing useful they could do, and I did not want to be the topic of jokes. At work, the forest felt different. Not because the trees changed, but because my place in it changed. I was no longer the person who watched and recorded. I was part of something else's attention. The dogman started showing up at transitional zones closer to home, like it was mapping the edge of the human world. I would see a tall shadow at the far bend of the road where it meets the trees. I would smell that odor near the fence line after rain. I would find a broken branch higher than my head just inside the property, like a marker. I tested it one more time, and I still regret that I did. There is a reason people say, do not feed fear. The more attention you give it, the more real it becomes. I wanted to know if it was reacting to me or if I was imagining patterns. So I set a simple test. I took a day off and stayed home, did not go into the forest. I stayed inside, did chores, kept the place quiet. That night, near midnight, the sounds came. Not loud, just present. A step near the edge. A pause. Another step. Then a low exhale sound that made the hair on my arm stand up because it sounded too close to the porch. I did not go outside. I did not peek through windows like a scared kid. I kept the lights low and stayed back. After a while, it went quiet again. In the morning, I found prints in soft mud near the edge of the yard. Not in the middle, but close enough to prove it had been there while I was inside. That confirmed the last piece for me. It was not tied to my work area alone. It had tied itself to me. The final encounter happened near my home, not deep in the forest. That is also part of what makes it feel like a point being made. It was early morning, just before full sunrise, when everything is gray and the world is half awake. I stepped out to start the truck. Frost was on the ground. My breath hung in the air. I heard nothing at first, just the normal small sounds of morning. Then I saw it at the far edge of the property, where the trees thicken. The dogman stood just inside the brush line, fully upright, facing me. This time the light was enough that I could confirm details without guessing. The outline of the muzzle, the slope of the shoulders, the way the arms hung long and ended in hands that were not paws. The legs were thick and angled in a way that supported standing. The fur looked dark and uneven, thicker around the shoulders and back. It held eye contact longer than before. That is what made my stomach turn. Animals glance. Predators stare, but usually with movement, with intent to close distance. This was different. It was a stare that felt like recognition, like it was checking my reaction, the way a person checks another person. I stood there, one hand on the truck door, unable to move. The Dogman did not advance. It did not show teeth. It did not drop to 4 legs. It simply held position, let me see it, and then turned and left on its own terms. It moved back into the trees without hurry and disappeared, and the moment was over like a switch had been flipped. I stayed there for a long time after it left, staring at the tree line. I checked the ground later and found a few deep impressions where it stood, pressed into the frost-soft earth. Enough to confirm weight. Enough to confirm this was not a trick of my mind. After that, I changed how I lived. I did not quit work, but I stopped working solo when I could. I adjusted my patrols. I avoided certain corridors. I did not camp in the field. I did not take unnecessary routes at dusk. I kept my home routines tighter. I installed better lights. I kept things simple and quiet. I did not make a show of it. I did not try to hunt it. I did not try to prove anything to anyone. I did not want to fight with something that could choose the rules. The strangest part, the part that still keeps me awake sometimes, is that it could have done more. It could have taken livestock from the farms nearby. It could have come right into the yard. It could have forced an encounter that would have ended badly for me. It did not. The restraint is what makes it worse, not better. It means it was in control the entire time. It means it chose what to show and what not to show. I think it followed me to make a point. It was not a warning in the normal sense. It was a statement. It wanted me aware of its range. It wanted me aware that my routines were visible to it. It wanted me to understand that distance was not a wall. It was permission. I do not tell this story to convince anyone. I do not care if people believe it. I tell it because it happened in a way that changed how I move through the world. I used to think the forest was a place you could learn like a system. Tracks, weather, animal sign, human behavior. Now I know there are things out there that learn you back. And once something like that knows where you live, the feeling never fully leaves. Even now, on quiet nights when the wind drops, I still catch myself listening for the wrong kind of familiar. The quiet that feels like it is listening back. The months in the middle were the hardest to describe to anyone because nothing traumatic happened on most days. That is the trap. You keep waiting for a single big moment that will explain it all, and instead you get a long run of small moments that add up. A print here, a mark there, a stretch of silence that happens at the wrong time. You start to question your own judgment because you are not seeing a monster every day. You are seeing a pattern, and patterns can live in your head if you let them. So you become careful. You become boring. You double-check everything that can be checked. I started paying more attention to the normal wildlife around my roots. If deer were moving, I noted where. If the birds were active, I noted the timing. It is not superstition. It is basic field sense. When things stop behaving normally, there is a reason. During that period, I kept running into those pockets where normal sound dropped away. Sometimes it happened just for a minute and then came back. Sometimes it lasted long enough that I would find myself walking slower, breathing quieter, as if my body knew to reduce its own noise. I would reach a bend in a trail and feel like the trees ahead were waiting. I also started noticing how often the sign appeared just outside my flashlight beam at night. If you have ever used a light in deep woods, you know your eyes rely on the edge of that beam as much as the center. The center shows you detail. The edge shows you movement. That is where the shape would be, at the edge, where you could not lock it down. It would never step into the full circle of light. It would stay where it could watch and still stay unclear. That kind of control is not random. I kept telling myself to treat it like a large predator that was curious. That was the only way to stay functional. If you start thinking about it as something smarter than that, you start making mistakes. So I followed basic safety. I avoided blind corners. I did not walk with both earbuds in like some people do. I kept my vehicle keys on me. I kept my radio charged. I kept my head on a swivel without acting like I was being hunted. I did not want to trigger anything. There were days when the work still felt normal. I would spend hours checking a drainage and see nothing strange. I would find fresh bear scat and a normal set of tracks. I would spot elk in a meadow and watch them move off. Those days almost made me forget, and a small thing would pull me back. A print in a patch of mud that should not hold a print because too much time had passed. A branch bent down at shoulder height that was too fresh to be old. That same musky odor sitting in a pocket of still air under thick trees like it had soaked into the ground. One of the clearest signs of intelligence was the way it handled open space. In my work area, there were a few narrow cuts where you had to cross exposed ground. It might be a small logging landing or a thin strip of open hillside where the trees had not grown back yet. Normal animals cross those areas fast. If they feel exposed, they move quickly. The Dogman did not do that when I watched from a distance. It did not bolt. It did not rush. It would stop at the edge, check, then slip back into cover and circle until it could move without being in my line of sight. That meant it understood sight lines. It understood what I could see and what I could not. I started using that knowledge in reverse. I would position myself where a human would have a wide view and then wait. I would watch the tree line for a long time, letting my eyes settle. On 2 different evenings, I saw movement that confirmed the same pattern. A dark shape would move in cover, pause, and then retreat when it realized the opening was too exposed. It was choosing routes based on my vision. That is not something you expect from common wildlife. There were also signs that it could travel close to roads without being seen. That surprised me because roads feel like human space. But if you work in the back country, you know roads can be dead zones. Nobody is on them for long stretches. They become animal corridors. I found prints near the edge of a service road after rain, and the prints were aligned with the road, not crossing it. That meant it was walking along the road in the dark or in low light, using the easy travel, and then stepping off when it heard a vehicle. More than once, I drove a long stretch at night and felt that feeling of being watched from the tree line. Headlights wash over trunks and brush and make shapes. Usually it is nothing. But a few times I caught a brief reflection, like eyes, at a height that did not match deer. I could never stop fast enough and get out and find anything. And the one time I did stop, I found nothing but that faint odor and one deep indentation at the edge of gravel like a heel press. By the second month, it started to feel like it was experimenting with me. That sounds strange, but I do not know another way to say it. It would let me find sign behind my truck, and it would stop for a while. It would leave tree marks high up, then it would stop. It would stay out of sight for days, then show a tall shape at the edge of a cut line, just long enough for me to register it. It was like it was measuring how I reacted. If I sped up, it would keep its distance. If I slowed down, it would parallel me. If I changed routes, the sign would shift to match. I began to feel like my awareness was the point. Not fear, not harm. Awareness. It wanted me alert to it. The worst part is that I started behaving like it wanted. I would look for it more. I would listen for it. I would adjust my work with it in mind. That meant it had already changed my routine without touching me. I kept this to myself, but it still affected how I interacted with coworkers. I would be more short with people, not because I was angry, but because my mind was tired. Long-term stress does that. You do not realize it is happening until you notice you are snapping over small stuff. You notice you are drinking more coffee because sleep is not as clean. You notice you are checking the lock twice because once is not enough for your head anymore. There were nights at home when I would wake up and think I heard a step on gravel outside. I would lie there and listen until my own heartbeat slowed. Most times it was nothing. Sometimes it was a deer. Sometimes it was the wind. But then, after one of those nights, I would go outside in the morning and see disturbed leaves near the fence line. That is how it kept pressure on without doing anything dramatic. I also became more aware of smells, and that surprised me. In the field, smell is information, but you do not usually focus on it the way you focus on tracks or sound. With this, smell became a warning. That musky odor showed up in the forest first, then near access roads, then near my property line. It never filled the whole yard. It stayed in pockets, like it clung to a path and did not spread. That made it feel like a trail, like something walked there, and the smell stayed behind in the still air. After rain, the smell would be stronger. Wet ground holds scent. I would step onto my porch after a rainy day and catch it faintly at the edge of the driveway, and my stomach would tighten before my brain even caught up. That is not imagination. That is a body reacting to an association it has learned. At one point, I tried to explain it to myself as a problem of two territories overlapping. Maybe the Dogman lived in the deep section, and I kept cutting across its route. Maybe it did not like that. That would have been easier to accept. The problem with that theory was the way it kept showing up in places that were not directly tied to a single route. It would show up near the road to my place. It would show up near a bend in a gravel lane I used. It would show up near the edge of my yard, even on days when I did not go into the back country. It was not just defending land. It was tracking me as a moving target. I started thinking of it the way you think of a person who is studying you from a distance. Not someone who wants to attack, but someone who wants you to know they are there. Someone who wants control through presence alone. The closest it ever came to a direct confrontation was still quiet. That is another detail that matters. It never screamed at me. It never rushed me. It never slapped trees to show strength. If it had done that, I might have reacted the wrong way and made things worse. Instead, it kept everything measured. It used silence, distance, and timing. The night I saw it by the property line, it did not act like an animal caught doing something. It did not flinch when I looked at it. It held still and let the moment happen. That felt like it wanted a clear exchange, not a fight, an exchange. It wanted me to see that it could choose to show itself or not, and it chose to show itself. After that night, I started to keep track of small changes around home the way I kept track in the field. I noticed when leaves were pushed aside in a way that made a narrow path. I noticed when a branch that was usually high was bent down lower. I noticed when the grass at the edge was flattened. These are small things, and most people would never notice. But when you spend your life reading the ground for information, you cannot unsee it once you start looking. I found one spot near the back edge of the place where the ground was pressed down in a wide oval, like something had sat there for a while. The grass was flattened in a way that did not match a deer bed. It was larger, heavier. When I stood there, that faint odor was strongest. I did not know if it was a rest spot or just a place I'd like to watch from. Either way, it meant it spent time near my home without me knowing. I never found any sign of it touching the house. No scratches on doors. No broken windows. No damaged siding. That matters because it tells you it was not trying to get inside. It did not need to. It could apply pressure from the edge and get the effect it wanted. It could change how I lived without forcing a dramatic event. That kind of restraint is not comfort. It is a reminder that the thing is not acting on panic. It is acting on choice. And a creature that chooses is more unsettling than one that only reacts. The last time I saw it, in the gray light before sunrise, I felt a different kind of fear. Not the shock fear from the first close encounter. This was a slower fear, a fear that comes from recognition. The Dogman stood there like it had done it before, like it knew that if it held still long enough, I would lock the image into memory and carry it. It did not need to chase me. It did not need to prove strength. It just needed to exist in my sight and then leave. When it turned away, it did so with the same calm control. It moved like it had nothing to prove. It left me standing there with the sound of my own breathing and the cold on my face, and it took the rest of the day from me. I did my work that day, but I was not fully in it. Part of my mind stayed on that tree line, replaying the shape and the posture and the long arms. In the weeks after, I tried to reduce the chances of an encounter by reducing predictability. That is a simple rule with people and animals. Predictability creates opportunity. I changed the way I arrived home. I took different roads. I left the house at slightly different times. I did not linger outside after dark. I kept the area around the porch brighter. I also stopped doing certain solo tasks on the far edges of my place after dusk. If I needed something, I did it in daylight. I also stopped going into certain backcountry pockets alone. If a route felt like it was part of its pattern, I avoided it. That meant taking longer drives and different loops, which is not efficient. But efficiency stopped being my top concern. Staying calm and staying safe mattered more than saving time. I never reported it officially. That is another choice people question. The truth is, there is nothing to report in a way that would be useful. I had tracks and smells and brief sightings. I had my own word. That is not a report that helps anyone. It just becomes a rumor, and rumors bring people who want to test them. The last thing I wanted was someone wandering into the wrong area looking for a thrill. I had seen enough to know that if the Dogman decided to stop being restrained, it could do real harm fast. So I kept quiet. I tightened my routines. I stopped working solo when possible. I let time pass. And over time, the sign near home became less frequent. That does not mean it left forever. It just means it stopped pressing as hard. Or it moved its attention elsewhere. Or it decided it had made its point. Even now, I do not walk certain edges of the property without scanning first. I do not stand on the porch at night for no reason. I do not park my truck where the tree line is too close. Those are small changes, and if you saw my life from the outside, you might not notice, but they are permanent changes. That is what the Dogman left me with, not a scar you can show. A set of habits you carry. People talk about the forest like it belongs to us because we map it and name it and cut roads into it. Out there, I learned there are still things that do not care about our claims. Things that move in the gaps and watch from the edges. Things that can learn a person the way a person learns a trail. That is why the wrong kind of familiar still bothers me. It is the feeling that something remembers you, and the knowing that it knows where you live.